We're going to get underway. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Tuesday, January 8th, Radnor Township School District Finance Committee meeting. And we will start with administrative remarks from Ms. Deco or Mr. Stitzel.
I just have a couple administrative remarks.
Great.
You will notice on the agenda that you have in front of you that there were a couple of changes regarding the supplemental changes and additions. Two of the numbers were transposed, so they are identified in red. You can see that was crossed off, and then the changes are in black. We'll talk a little bit more about those when we get to that agenda item.
So that's your administrative remark?
Correct.
Great, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
There is a community group that is willing to donate a scoreboard over in Sulpizio. So if it will be no cost to the district. They will pick up the complete cost of the scoreboard installation, and they'll be working with the township on the location and to make sure everything that the township wants out of it and where it is will be acceptable to the township as well. So we're just asking for a head nod from this committee to move that donation on to the January agenda.
Okay, well, let me do this. We'll talk about that briefly in new business at the end.
Okay.
But thank you
Fair
for
enough.
letting us know. All righty. And with that, did everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes? Oh, no, we're going to do public comment.
Yep.
And no, we usually do approval of minutes and then public comment, don't we?
No,
Public comment.
so they can change the
Oh,
minutes.
that's right, thank you. Public comment. If there is any public comment, please come forward. If you haven't already signed in, please do so afterwards. Welcome, Mrs. Sherry.
Judy Sherry, Governor Circle, Newtown Square. The last meeting I did bring up facility rental fees. I'm hoping to hear some comments regarding what looks like a decrease in revenue related to those. The draft budget was not posted, I don't think, till fairly late today. I'm not sure when it was posted, but I didn't see it earlier. The law firm Raphael Pupio is listed for a recommendation for approval tonight, with increases in rate in every category. Michael Pupio has been chairman of the Springfield Republican Party since 2006. He's a founding partner of Raphael Pupio, the law firm that's on the agenda. He is a district leader for the Delaware County Republican Party and has been a national delegate to the 2008 and 2012 Republican National Conventions. He was recently the chairman of McGarrigle for State Senate. So he's a very strong and active partisan player. How does the board feel this relationship benefits students? Do board members believe that Mr. Pupio's Republican educational priorities align with theirs at this time? And my other suggestion is the draft budget that was posted has within it pages that are numbered, but it would really be helpful to have the entire boatload, I was going to say, of reports numbered so that if someone has a question, they can say, turn to page 223 or something, because it's hard to find things otherwise. And if someone wants to make a comment, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Which means numbered overall.
Yes, numbered over, yeah, I got it.
We
Welcome,
did
Mrs.
talk
Spurtle.
about that previously.
It shows up when you're, but it doesn't show up on the paper if you want to print it. Cindy Spurtle Wayne, in answer to that question. Just to comment on the, I know this is this the preliminary draft? What's the term on this one?
This is called the draft budget.
Not the preliminary draft, this is the draft. So we're second stage, second step?
This is first step,
First step, okay.
and then it'll be proposed final,
Okay,
and then final.
okay.
And sometimes proposed final and preliminary, those two terms are used to mean the same thing.
Thank you. In looking at the total, the difference between total revenues budgeted and total expenses budgeted, there, and I understand that when we come to the final budget, they will match, but the question I have is, for the 18-19 budget, the difference between, there was the expenses exceeded revenues by $970,000, and which a little under, if you want to say a little under $1 million. The budget that we're looking at now, we're close to $2 million difference between revenue and expenses. And any kind of an explanation on where maybe the bulk of that lies, I'm trying to see. There's big categories here that show other expenditure, other objects that have high difference totals and budgetary reserves, but it didn't seem to be out of whack on salaries. I understand we're going into a new contract year, and if I remember correctly, for the next 4 years, we're into our first year already of the new contract with the teachers. It's 2.5 approximately increase in salaries every year was guaranteed in the contract, and looks like the difference for the 1920 budget at this point in time is 2.94%. So there's almost a half a percent increase over and above the contracted salaries for the teachers. I also noticed that the healthcare expense, different percentage was higher than the salary percentages for the coming year budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I will ask for an approval of the minutes of the December 4th meeting. Are we all good? That's great. Okay, then let's move right into agenda item 4.1. This is an agenda item for action. We're going to be making approvals at the board meeting, so this is just a review. Michelle, I have a question. Well, two things. Under donations, the Ithan Elementary School, that's the PTO that is donating the compensation for the before-school sponsor, correct?
It is, and I apologize, you and I did speak about adding the PTO. We will correct that before.
Okay, so on the budget.
For the board meeting, we will correct that.
The question I have is, as I'm looking at the agenda item, is now an appropriate time to just ask the committee if we would be okay, with approving a donation. So the Radnor Youth Basketball, and I think Todd and Michelle can fill in, but the upshot is they'd like to donate a scoreboard at Sulpizio Gym. Now, we just had a tour of Sulpizio Gym as part of the facilities meeting, but as it happens, which I didn't know that was on the agenda, as it happens, I do know that they had reached out. So maybe, Todd, can you fill us a little bit in, and we could get the donated value in time for the board meeting. I know it's a few $1,000s, but could you give us some background here?
Yeah, we were approached, actually the township was approached to have a scoreboard donated. The township then referred the organization to us regarding that. The cost with the scoreboard and installation, I believe, is under $5,000, but $6,000 to be safe, but I believe it's under $5,000. And they would be willing to do everything. We would do nothing. There is absolutely no cost to us. The only thing we requested in speaking to Bob, who is the point person for the organization, was just please make sure you follow whatever the township is desiring since they're leasing the building. And he was fine with that. We talked to the township. I just confirmed with the township again tonight after the tour to make sure they were still in agreement with everything we talked about, and they are. So it's a matter of us putting it on for the agenda.
So that was Bob Nicholas, who's
Yes.
Yes.
he's either the treasurer or the president of Radnor Youth Basketball.
He's one of
right?
the officers.
Okay, one of the officers. So are we comfortable with accepting a straight-up donation to Sulpizio Gym for scoreboard?
I am.
Everybody's good with that? I know they're trying to move this forward to be able to use it for their basketball season that's going on right now. Okay, so Michelle, if we could, if anybody has any questions about the disposals or the contracts here that are also on the agenda for approval at the board meeting?
I don't have any question about the disposals, but on the contract side, I do just definitely want to point out, while I respect Ms. Sherry's perspective about Raphael Pupio and the law firm, I will remind that we do not utilize Michael Pupio directly in our services. We utilize Gabrielle, it's going, right? As our representative. It is in the area of educational litigation and things like that, special education. And I do want to point out, because I know the school district does in fact love ratings and things like that. This is not something I knew before, but I wanted to look up Gabrielle's name, and lo and behold, right on the front page of their website, which I didn't know till I walked in here, was that they were most recently ranked as U.S. News's best law firm, Tier 1 ranking in Philadelphia. And I had known, because when we hired Gabrielle, we really were hiring Gabrielle when we hired their law firm. I knew that she had been ranked, but she continued to be ranked as a super lawyer by Reuters since 2013. So I think she's given us really excellent representation. I've had absolutely no question with regards to the guidance or the direction she's given to the school district, and I am wholly confident and comfortable that the political affiliations of Michael Pupio, who indeed is a head partner of the firm, has no bearing on the representation that we've received from them in this special education arena. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So one of the other attorneys that we use is Ernie Angelos, and
I didn't mention real estate. Apologies.
so for real estate tax appeals.
Are there any other comments? Yeah. So, totally respect Ms. Booker and Mr. Miller's feelings on this. My only question about this, we had a conversation earlier this year about our law services, and as a committee, we decided a few months ago that we've found value in keeping consistency with our legal representation, particularly when they are serving us well. With regard to our special education services, I've heard, I have to agree with Patty, I've heard nothing, to the contrary. We've always been well served by Gabby and Ernie. And you said yourself a few months ago, there is value in that. I think, Sarah, you said that as well, as an attorney, that, when we are being served well, that being said,
It's a big gap.
that being said, this is an
It's a big
increase.
jump in fees. It is. I mean, $35 an hour for special ed services is a significant increase.
Right. So we had talked as a committee, Patty, and I don't know that you were at this meeting, and so I just wanted to kind of update you. Right now, the CAC is quite busy with a number of projects, and what we discussed as a committee is later in this year, kind of circling back to CAC and seeing if they have, would have the time and the ability to take on the concept of evaluating what services we should perhaps put out for RFP. And, all of our, there's a variety of services we get that they might look at and say, yes, you should do RFPs X number of years. So I'm comfortable with, supporting this right now, and it will be among the things that we might ask CAC to look at, later down the road. Not even specifically our law services, but we had asked them to look at what would they think about would be best practices about the concept of going out for RFPs for a variety of contracted services.
Yeah, and I think that is our fiduciary responsibility, something we've abdicated for in the past, and we have done with some regular cadence. It's been a while since we've done it. I think it's completely prudent that we do it, and I would look across the board. It was educational the last two times we did it. It was helpful to just balance the field, see what's out there, what's market rate, what's the expectations. I think that's all good and responsible for us. I do want to point out, though, I think these billable rates, and Michelle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they've changed their billable rates in the last 3 years. So I just want to be sure that I realize this is a fairly significant jump for a one-time, but I don't believe they've raised their rates in quite some time.
They haven't raised their rates since I've been here. I started here in 2014.
So I just wanted to add that
It's been at least
context.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the first time I ever remembered it coming up for a rate increase. So in any event, we all support recommending this moving forward. Okay, great. And now we're going to move on to the supplemental changes. you made some changes. My downloaded version is from Friday, so I just want to make sure, what are the new numbers that you're talking
The
about?
numbers were wrong before.
The floor hockey club and the ski club numbers were flipped. So in the original posting, floor hockey was listed as 923.60 going to 1847. That should be ski club.
Okay.
And the original ski club should be floor hockey club.
Okay,
And years ago, when Michelle and I tackled the supplemental and looked at it, we committed that we would look to revise as needed. And back in early November, we were approached by middle school administration to increase these three clubs, and it was indicated to us that the numbers were drastically increased. So we put it on the agenda, and I was following up, and based on the numbers, we actually would like to pull Pen Pal Club. We don't believe that is warranting an additional hours at this time based on their needs. However, floor hockey club and ski club have been great last year, and this year the participation for floor hockey club is 140 students and ski club is 104 students. So we think that drastic of a number does warrant some kind of increase. We are not certain how the 707.60 came about years ago, which is 30.65 hours, which is odd because typically we do things in half hours or hours. So that 30.65 is not being doubled. It's only going to 60, but it's all but doubled. And we are recommending to double the ski club based on that number as well of over 100 students.
So quick question. Participation makes sense, right? When we say number of kids helps in the calculation, the formula that we're using. But how do we determine the hours?
When Michelle and I met with the supplementals themselves, it was based on the hours that they worked. The clubs are typically based for 1 hour per week for 40 weeks, has been the tradition. And since we're going to need more people for the ski club, a second person, and floor hockey has had a second person, it's kind of that 40 equals the 80 because it would be 2 people for 40 weeks. Even though ski club is condensed, they still are allotted 40 hours. That's been something that's been standard since before we got here, as far as 1 hour per week for 40 weeks, and then they divvy it up how they need to.
So then, thank you. Is it an expectation then that when it's a club that it's an hour a week?
That is the
Generally
typical
speaking.
expectation, yes.
Because we did it last month, I guess, the board approved the indoor color guard at the middle school, which had skipped 2 years. It was there, and then we didn't have a teacher, and then it skipped, and it wasn't in anything. And it was supported, and I appreciate the board voting on it. But I struggled when I saw it, because I was like, 40 hours for color guard that's like 3 weeks. It's like 3 weeks. So I was trying to understand. I just wanted to get a sense of how
typically
does
it's for,
that.
like the bake club would be 40 hours, 1 hour per week. They may only do it for 20 weeks and do 2 hours per week
Right.
because of the baking time and those type of things. But all the clubs are typically 1 hour per week for roughly 40 school weeks.
Do we have sports clubs, or are the clubs all these kinds of?
The clubs are all these kinds. The supplementals, that the teachers do, those other supplementals that we did that report on, those were based on the 2309 and based on the numbers of
Student
student participation and the hours they did before, after school, and during the summer.
Okay.
So what we can do is down the road is, if, example, indoor color guard, if it becomes a supplemental instead of a club, then we would look
Right.
for those number of hours
cool.
and do that.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I was happy it got back on there,
But
period.
the initial phase, from my understanding from before I got here, is it becomes a club, and then at some point, when the administration would request it, it would become a supplemental, and then we would do I don't know how they did it before, but the calculations that Michelle and I used in the previous years, we would sit down and do that same thing and come here with a recommendation.
Gotcha, thanks.
So I had a couple questions. First, just for clarity, next time could you do me a favor and make sure that the school is listed? I guessed it was middle school.
Sorry.
Yep.
Only because my daughter's in the ski club, and I was like, well, it's probably a ski club. The question I had for you, just part of the kind of the additional hours due to participation, I thought there was a cap on the ski club. So I just wonder, I mean, is this that much bigger than last year?
Well, the ski club was large last year.
Okay.
And we discussed it with administration at the end of last year.
Okay.
And their concern was for safety to have somebody else kind of as a point person there, because, you know, if you're out on the slopes, one person as the point is a little tougher If you have two, at least one can be in the lodge or one skiing. And
Okay, so we're
we
kind of correcting what we did last year, because I know,
Correct.
because we got notices, it fills up, we have
Correct.
capped participation. Last year, there were kids who didn't get in, so I wanted to make sure that the change
And
wasn't
the same
something
thing with
new
the
to
floor
us.
hockey. It was large for the last several years, but in talking to the administration over at the middle school at the end of last year, it was decided that because of that increased and the floor hockey being itself, we're looking
Yeah.
at that safety issue as well and have that extra time where.
Okay, and I will say, at least on behalf of Ski Club, I know, it's 3 trips, it's a significant amount of time loading, monitoring the kids for those 3 trips, but it's also, there's a lot, the teachers do a lot of communication with the parents. We've gotten a number of different emails that are very detailed and very helpful as parents, giving you a lot of feedback. So I can personally see there's a lot of time and effort going in to that club. So the 40 hours, even though it's, some people will go, well, it's just 3 ski trips. It's clearly a lot of work that the teachers are doing. Appreciated.
Oh, sorry. All right, good. So you're going to clarify that it's the middle school. And then what you're recommending is deleting the increase to the Pen Pal Club. So we won't
Correct.
see the Pen Pal Club on the board agenda.
You will not see that on the board agenda.
All right, and-
You will see middle school, and you will see the floor hockey club with those rates and the ski club with those rates.
Great. Okay, so we're comfortable with that, everybody? All righty, then why don't we move into 4.3, the draft budget?
So I just want to make a clarification. The draft budget was posted on the budget page on December the 21st. Typically, what we do is we put a link here in board docs. That's what we've done in the past. I was made aware this morning that the link was not working. We thought that it was working, and so Jackie graciously fixed it for us this morning. I appreciate that she had done that. So it was posted that you would have been able to find it if you would have gone to the district homepage and then gone to departments, business administration, or use the quick link, and then gone to budget.
All righty, well, thank you for clarifying that, Mrs.
Welcome.
Deco, and we apologize to everybody, but thank you, Jackie, for fixing that. All righty, so we'll get underway.
So I hope everyone had a chance to look at the draft budget. I know you got it over the Christmas break, so that always gives you something fun to do over the Christmas holidays if you get tired of opening gifts and things like that. So this is set up the same way as documents that you've received in the past. It starts with a cover memo. I just want to point out on page 3 of the cover memo, the very last paragraph, it says the spend, it talks about the spend down plan of the employer rate stabilization fund. It references 2018-19. That actually should be 2019-20. So if you want to just make that notation. Some of the highlights in this budget, it does include the maximum tax increase allowed by the Act 1 index, which is 2.3%. We've looked at the local revenue, the state revenue, and the federal revenues, and unfortunately, the governor's budget is not out yet, so we've set those state revenues at 2018-19 levels. State budget typically comes out sometime in February. Again, this is the draft, so there's a lot of work that gets done between now and when the proposed final or preliminary budget is adopted by the board. We're tentatively scheduled to do that in April. So if we look at this draft budget, you can see that the projected revenues are $99,270,249. Projected expenses are $101,194,639, leaving a shortfall of just over $1.9 million. There had been some conversation, public comment earlier about what makes up that shortfall. I can tell you that a large percentage of that shortfall is made up by increases to special education. That's around $512,000. And then also increases to retirement, $840,000. And then the other large increase that we've seen from last year's budget to this year's budget includes the addition of a number of instructional aides, mostly for students with special needs. So one of the things that administration is going to be working on between now and when we come back to you with the preliminary proposed final budget is reviewing all of those instructional aids and making sure that we understand what's causing the need for those instructional aids, making sure that we really do need all of those instructional aids and that we have an adequate amount budgeted for next year.
Michelle, real quick, why wouldn't you have counted the instructional aids as part of the increase in special ed?
Because when we look at the increase in special ed, we never look at salaries and benefits in terms of that increase. We only look at what special ed pupil services that department is responsible for, and they are not responsible for salaries and benefits. That actually falls on the responsibility of human resources. So it's certainly something we can look at if we would move it into that, if we would say that's a special education expenditure, that 512,000 would be substantially larger.
So, and I apologize, Michelle, if I missed this. Did you say how much you think the increase in instructional aids has been or will be?
I'm sorry, excuse me?
The cost for the increase in the instructional aids? You don't have that number yet?
I don't have it with me here.
Okay, no, that's fine. You were giving other numbers.
We did talk about that. Ken and I and Todd had a conversation about how much of that was related specifically to the instructional aids. I can't remember what it was. I can tell you that in 2018-19, we budgeted for 101 instructional aids. Doing the budget for 2019-20, we're budgeting for 122. So that is a substantial increase. So that's one of the reasons why we need to take a much closer look at all of those individual instructional aids and who they are serving, the population that they're serving, just to make sure that we're not double counting anyone and that we've accounted for everyone that we need to.
I've asked Michelle and HR to work with special education to look at how many are a result of students who, arrive at our door with an IEP that requires a one-to-one aid, so that we can, so the board and all of us can see exactly what those numbers look like.
So not included in this budget, there is no capital expenditures. So if you look at the tab that says Capital Reserve Fund, it's the very last one. That's Fund 32. You'll notice that everything for the budget is blank. What happens in the last few weeks of January and the month of February, Mr. Stitzel and I will go out to each of the buildings. We'll review the capital plan for the various buildings. We'll talk with building principals to determine what their needs are in their building. And we'll talk with our maintenance people to determine what we need to look forward to replacing in the next 5 years, and we'll put together that capital plan. We'll then come back to the Finance or Facilities Committee and ask them to review it, probably in February or March. And if we can do it in February, we'll do it in February. Otherwise, it will be March. And then the committee will make a recommendation about what to include, what not to include. We'll also continue to make changes up until the time that we recommend the budget for final approval. That will include changes to revenue, changes to expenditures. We get more information at the end of February, beginning of March. And so then we can make some additional changes. We'll have information from the IU regarding our special education costs. We'll make those adjustments, and we'll also refine anything to do with enrollment and additional staffing needed. We also do not have included in this budget any use of the rate stabilization fund. That will require some additional conversation. The spend down plan suggested that we use $80,117,000. However, we have the ability to use more than that if we so desire, or less. There's still going to be funds left once that spend down plan was supposed to be completed, which is 2019-20. It also does not include any use of exceptions, and that's a conversation we need to have tonight if we would like to apply for exceptions. PDE does not have their exception calculator out on the website. I did take a look at what we used last year. It does not appear that we will qualify for anything for retirement, or if we do, it would be a very small amount, but it looks like we will qualify for around $600 and $51,000 worth of special education exceptions. Again, that doesn't mean you need to use those if you apply for them, but they are available to you. It just gives you more flexibility.
Michelle, are you going to go over this summary of changes in the committed and assigned and unassigned sheet?
I can.
Yeah. It's the landscape report.
It's the first landscape report after the memo. And so what this shows is the fund balances that were committed or unassigned as of June 30th, 2018. That's coming directly from our audit report that we just adopted in December. If we anticipated using those funds, or if those funds are not available, they're in the next column. So if they're in red, that means that they're not available because they've been earmarked for a specific purpose. If it's in black, that means that we are planning to utilize that. So you can see that there's just under $3 million that is either being used or not available. Just under $2 million is not available because that's earmarked for curriculum, technology, and compensated absences and early retirement incentives. And then $800,000 that we are anticipating using in 18-19 of the rate stabilization fund. That shows, the next column then shows the general fund anticipated balance at June 30th of 19, any anticipated usage in 19-20, and then any fund balance that's available. You can see that there's $6.5 million that would be available for use for capital projects. There's also money that would be available from the rate stabilization fund and unassigned that the district could use to help balance the budget for 2019-20.
Now, were you able to take a look at that technology initiative issue where the amount that's not available is the 533, but the balance for 19 is staying the same?
That number should actually be the 952, so that
the red.
it should be the red where it says 533. That should actually be the 952.
Okay.
Because that's been earmarked for technology. If you recall, curriculum and technology are sub-funds of Fund 10, and we transfer the same amount of money to those funds every year to even out the expensive years and the less expensive years so that we don't have to make up when we transfer lesser dollars. We are going to be looking at that as part of that transfer, as part of our process as we go forward to April and bring to you the proposed final. But right now, what's in the budget, the draft budget, it includes the same amount that we've been transferring over the last several years.
So Michelle, then the numbers down the bottom about the not available and all of that, that should be 2.3 million to 2. Oh, I don't know if you came up with that. Instead of the 1.9.
Correct.
Okay.
And I will adjust this document and I'll repost it out to the website.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And I'll put a notation on when it was modified, and I'll put it on the budget document as well. So the next document I want to bring your attention to is the one-page general fund draft budget summary. It's the one that shows the local revenues at the top, the fund balance in the center, and the expenses at the bottom. This makes an assumption that in order to balance the budget, that we would use the committed retirement rate increases of $83,117 and an unassigned fund balance of $1,841,000. That's just making the assumption based on the draft budget, which was presented on December 21st. These numbers, of course, will be adjusted. Thank you.
They don't taste good, though.
They don't taste good? I don't know. Every time I go over to Sulpizio Gym, I get this like tickle in my throat, and I don't know why. Thank you, Penny. So one of the things that we had talked about Susan and I had spoke about when we were doing our planning meeting for today was having a dedicated meeting of the entire board just for the purpose of budget, and having that in April. And I think that that's a good idea. I think it would be helpful if, as a group, we got together, and by April, we'll have many answers to some of the questions. We'll know what the governor's budget is. We should know what the federal budget dollars are. We should have done an analysis on all of our staffing, and we should have information about what our projected enrollments are going to be. So as a whole board, we certainly could have a meeting. But prior to that, we'll have to make a decision about whether or not you would like administration to apply for Act 1 exceptions.
Which will amount to about how much this year?
651,000 is my estimate.
Thanks.
And just special education exceptions, nothing for retirement, or maybe a very small amount. Last year, we applied for exceptions. We only were granted $14,000 worth of exceptions. We didn't use any of those.
Right, so just so everyone's aware, Mike and I were in communication about this as well. Tuesday, April 9th is our April finance meeting. You know, because this meeting runs the last meeting of the night, it's at 7 o'clock. If you look at the budget calendar, it's a page behind the one-page draft budget that Michelle has here. We had slotted in a Thursday in April to be determined to have a budget work session. In looking at the calendar and when Michelle thinks she's going to have numbers and just the timing of some of the information that we even talked about in facilities with regard to the buses and the bleachers and all those things, the April 9th Finance Committee meeting, if we pencil that in as a committee of the whole and have a budget finance meeting that Tuesday night, it saves us a different Thursday night to be out and still gives us the flexibility to direct the administration to keep working in April and even up to and through the May finance meeting, you know, in anticipation of getting to, you know, a final budget passage in May, hopefully, and, you know, or June, but hopefully May. The big question tonight, I think, Michelle, you're asking us is, you know, you're going to be asking the board for direction at the January meeting on whether or not to seek exceptions.
So at the January meeting, we have a couple options that we can do. We can pass a resolution saying that we will not exceed the Act 1 index, and then we would have to stay within that 2.3%. Or we can pass a resolution adopting the draft budget and authorizing administration to apply for the Act 1 exceptions, and then administration will apply for those exceptions. We have to wait and see if those are granted, and then as we go through the budget process, we could either use those, not use those, use some of them, all of them, or none. That gives us the most flexibility. So those are the options that we have. So I'm asking the board for direction as to what you would like to do. My recommendation would be to apply for the exceptions, allow administration to continue to work on the budget. We know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done between now and April, and we will work diligently to do that. I don't want anyone to think that if you apply for exceptions, the stance that administration is going to take is, well, that's $651,000 we don't have to look for, because that's not the position we will take.
Okay, so I guess I'd like to open it up to questions now. I don't know if anyone has anything that caught their eye or just, you know, this is really, it's a draft budget for a reason. It's so early in the process, but, you know, nonetheless, here we are. And Patty?
Yeah,
Sarah?
so a
Okay.
couple questions. The not thank you, and I will something I had mentioned to Susan. I appreciate the consistent reporting year to year. Gone are the days where we have to go down the basement and pull up all my old reports to connect the dots to understand what's going on with the finances in the district. The year-to-year consistency makes these documents incredibly easy. I would even put it on the scale of like a 1 on the puzzle rating. Just saying, so thank you for that. And I hope that people in the community, you know, take the time to take a look at it, because I do think that the information is fairly readily visible. So mentioning that the CapEx, again, not included in our budget. I know we did that last year, and we still had something to overcome. I know in the December meeting where we got the report from our audit report, and we had the understanding that we had I'll use the dirty word, surplus, of, what was it, 1.5
Just over
million?
No, just
1.09 or something, okay.
just over $1 million.
$1 million. And we had allocated, so I guess one question I have is, because my recollection of that, which I left that paper in my car from last month's meeting, most of that was geared at, or put towards curriculum and/or the technology fund.
That's correct.
But
Just
is
over
that-
700,000 of that million
so
was
it-
set aside for that purpose.
So is that reflected in those fund budgets here in the back of the packet? Because I didn't see it.
So it's actually on the report that shows the fund balance, the general fund balances, and
Right.
it's being identified as not available. And one of the reasons as it's being identified as not available is because we transfer the same amount over to Fund 15 and Fund 17 every year. We've done that for a series of years because we were trying to get away from transferring a large amount one year and a small amount the next, and then having to make up for the large amount the following year. So we were looking at a 5-year budget plan for each of those funds and figuring out what's the ideal amount for us to transfer so we don't have those big ebbs and flows in the budget. That's one of the things that I think I alluded to a little bit earlier that we need to look at in more detail now, especially in light of the fact that the Technology Committee has made some recommendations regarding changes to the devices that we're going to be using. So between now and April, we will look at those 5-year budget projections to see if that transfer amount is where it needs to be, or perhaps it can be reduced.
Right, so that actually models, right, the CapEx stuff, the capital expenditures, having the 5-year budget and having that visibility and trying to smooth things out for that budgeting purpose so we don't see those peaks and valleys. I guess my surprise in terms of the action that we took was to transfer that much, knowing that we already have some CapEx items that we don't really have much of a choice around. I mean, unless we're just simply not going to pay the township the $300 or whatever $1,000 they're going to pay for a bridge, and we're obligated to. I know some people would argue we probably shouldn't, but hey, you know, I kind of take contractual agreements pretty seriously, and we signed it. And much like other people walking out on us, I don't think it's appropriate for us to walk out on them. So I'm a little bit concerned about not having CapEx. I understand why we are where we are, and I get that, so I'm not questioning why you did it the way you did. It provides a visibility, too, of real hard decisions that we have to make around CapEx. But there is that $300,000 hanging out there. And I guess by putting the $700,000 year in and year out in those two funds, it creates a level of spending expectation that concerns me a little bit. Because we have a lot of buildings to take care of, too, and I know it's not as glamorous, and I know it's not as sexy or cool, but we have some buildings that need some work. And if we're going to put $700,000 without having a strong reasoning why into those budgets, we should be doing the same thing for CapEx. My preference in terms of CapEx would actually be whatever's left over at the end of the year should be put into a CapEx fund, because CapEx is what gets you. You know, a roof replacement is considerably, you know, unnegotiable, non-negotiable, versus some other decisions we get to make. So I like strategically, I think we really need to talk about that, because this being the second year we have nothing in the plan for CapEx is concerning, and we're going to have to figure that out. In terms of the capital budget, since I'm on that topic, and I think that's really my only other question for the evening, because I did see the other fund balance stuff you had in there, which I always like to look at. What is can we talk about that just for a minute in terms of, even though it's not in the budget, what is the area of spending that we would think we'd be in just for the regular capital improvement items that we know we have to do?
Do you have any idea?
I wouldn't have that
We haven't even begun to look at that. So we have the capital expenditure plan that we did for 2018-19, and I could pull that up and take a look and see what we anticipated that we would be spending in 1920. But we review that every year. And if
Right.
you'd like me to do that, I can go out to the budget page and I can look at that and
So
see.
no, it's okay, I understand. So we've not yet done a CapEx review of what, for this year's review of what would be in the 1920. We haven't done that yet.
We have not. We'll do that the last 2 weeks of January and the beginning of February.
Okay. And included in that will be the 300,000 for the bridge?
Included in that will be the $300,000 for the bridge, any other new requests that have become a priority from the buildings. And buses will be a part of that. There'll be some money for potential bleacher projects up at the high school. And we'll probably have some other things that we bring to you that may not have made it onto the list, but we'd like you to consider adding to the list. We have a request for the installation of some playground equipment at one of the elementary schools. And we have a variety of things. We'll also look at what we thought we were going to be spending in 2018-19 and determine if we're going to spend all of that money or not spend all of that money. And if we're not spending all of those funds, we'll roll that in and reduce the amount of the transfer that we're asking for.
The transfer,
From the general fund,
because we're not asking for any transfer right now,
as of
though,
right now, but we eventually will be
Oh.
asking for a transfer.
Sorry, I thought I missed something. Okay, so this committee's going to be looking at that next month?
Hopefully February. If we don't get it done by February, it will be March. Which still gives us enough time to get everything in for the
Right, exactly.
April budget.
So here, I'm hearing Patty's, questions, all good, valid. What's kind of begging the question, Mike and I were just jotting a note to each other. The next 2 or 3 months, because our committees, as it happens, are the same 4 people, we have a lot of economy of scale here. In the next couple of months, February, March, I would say February, March in particular, some of the things that we discussed in facilities, the conversation about the bleachers, the conversation about school start times and its potential impact on transportation and the buses and all, this CapEx conversation, we have a real opportunity to kind of be economic with our time and our topics, and maybe we should look at kind of blending our agenda over the next 2 months and take a look at the facilities issues, coterminous with the financial piece of it, and take an opportunity to really tackle that, be ready to go when there's a meeting in April of the whole board. Does that sound good, Patty? If we're, really taking on facilities and, oftentimes facilities and finance end up saying, well, you kind of can't look at the one without looking at the other. They're so intertwined anyway. So we should start that in February. Okay?
That's fine.
All right. But in the meantime, based on Michelle's recommendation, again, to, I think, keep her flexibility, she is looking for a recommendation from us. I know, Sarah, you have one more question, but, just in the back of your mind here, as we wrap this up, to be looking for a recommendation of us, are we comfortable with recommending that she go out for exceptions, keep our options open as they continue to fine-tune the numbers here? So just, I want Sarah to ask her a couple of questions, but ultimately, Michelle's looking for that direction from us.
Yeah. And you may not have this off the top of your head. Ms. Sherry asked a question about the change in the facility rental fees. And I don't know, I couldn't tell from what's here if we're just being conservative because we had some special events that were scheduled this year and we don't think we'll get those rental fees next year, or do we have a sense of why we think they're going to decrease? The total there is $20,000. But
So we have seen some decreases in our facility rental requests.
Okay.
Not because of the fact that we've raised rates, because we have not raised rates, and we're looking at the possibility of raising the rates, but because we have some rentals that are once in a while rentals. They're not our regular rentals. We've also had some rentals that have moved from one building to another, or rentals that as I said earlier, are only here once in a great while. So this is a conservative number. We'll look at that again. But it's based on 5 months' worth of history in 18-19 school year compared to the past 5 years. So that will be adjusted. But that's the reason for it, because what we're seeing right now, what we've collected, we don't anticipate that we will be generating as much revenue as we had in the past.
Okay, and this is a particularly small number, but I was just kind of curious, what parking permits and fines, who are we charging for parking permits? Is that seniors at the high school, or?
Charge seniors at the high school for
Oh,
parking.
seniors or juniors?
Seniors
If
or
they
juniors
get-
at the high school for parking, anyone who has a reserved parking space up at the high school. I guess they're not reserved this year, I think they made some changes to that. And then we do issue parking tickets on our campus, and if we receive payment for that, it goes in that account as well.
Okay. And we just don't, we'd expect that to go down next year, or we're just being conservative?
Again,
a little bit good
being
about
conservative.
fines? Okay. Thanks.
Mike, questions? Okay. All righty, so then, given Michelle's recommendation, are we comfortable as a committee recommending for the board meeting, going out for exceptions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to
Yeah,
give
it's better
Michelle
to
the
have it.
flexibility she needs.
Okay,
Yeah, it's better to have it not needed.
Keep in mind, this is Ken's budget.
We want Ken to have all the flexibility.
there you go. Okay, all right, well then I think, Patty? Okay, good. All right, so with that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which I believe is, and thank you, Michelle, and I know that you guys still have a lot of heavy lifting to do, Ken and everybody. Yep, exactly. All right, do we have new business? All righty, seeing
Susan,
none?
I have one thing that I just wanted to bring up. I forgot to bring
sure.
up earlier. Our contract for our substitute teachers.
Source for teachers.
Source for teachers for our substitute teacher services is expiring this year. So in the next 4 to 6 weeks, the HR office, and I've invited building principals and central office administrators, we will be looking at the 4 major players to see what they can offer us, to see if we'll be changing or staying with our same company.
And that could be a potential reduction.
And that could be a potential reduction.
Okay, so you're going to be coming back to us at a future,
Either February or March, we'll be coming back to you with the recommendation and why we're recommending
what you are?
either leaving our current provider or staying with our current provider.
Okay, great, super.
And do you go out to bid for that, or is it a general negotiation, kind of just where you ask for them?
It's more of a negotiation because it's services, so
Okay.
we'll bring in the 4 major players. I'll be talking to HR directors in Montgomery County, Chester County, Delaware County, see the rates they're paying, the latest ones, so we can negotiate those prices as well.
Well, thank you for that update, Todd, I appreciate it. All righty, so with that, I'm going to hold a final round of public comment. Oh, seeing none, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.